Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar focusing on COVID-19 and recent Canadian immigration updates. Today we're joined by partners Shoshana Green and Ravi Jain. We'll save some time at the end of the webinar for your questions, so please feel free to type out your questions in the text box on the pop-up toolbar on your screen. You can also reach out to us at info@gans.com or by emailing the contact email addresses provided on screen. Don't forget to follow us on social media and sign up to our latest alerts where we provide the latest immigration updates and breaking news. And with that, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Thank you. Okay, well, I guess I'll start. I have to say that the government has been very, very cooperative in communicating all the different changes and fielding questions, from the Canadian Bar Association, which I'm heading up. So I've been able to have weekly calls with them, and they've been just great at clarifying so much confusion that has been out there, because there's been just a flurry of laws that have been passed, and then laws replacing laws, and then laws replacing those laws, etc. So it's been quite a busy few weeks. But I am happy to provide a bit of an update based on the latest. So firstly, a lot of lawyers across the country were wondering about bringing in people who normally do not need visas and can normally apply upon entry when they fly into Canada. And of course, a lot of our clients are wondering about those types of folks who traditionally have been able to do that. There was what's called a ministerial instruction, which is a law that was able to be passed just by the minister alone. And the minister issued that instruction, which basically said that going forward, no one could come in from overseas, and this does not include the U.S. border and people who are coming from the U.S., but any other country. If you're flying in, you cannot get your work permit at the border. You have to apply to get it in advance. So you actually have to either have a work permit in hand, or you have to have a work permit approval letter. Now, a logical question is, what about those people who don't need work permits to work in Canada? And some of you know that there is a category of people who do not require work permits, but may work without a work permit under a special exemption. And some lawyers were emailing me saying, my understanding is that they can come in. And the answer is no, they cannot. Those individuals will have to apply for, if they need electronic travel authorization, which is for, let's say, you're a UK national. Some of you know that you can't just fly into the country. You've got to apply for an ETA, which is a quick online form. And those individuals will be able to do that and say that they are applying for a specific work permit exemption. So when you need to come in for that, that's the process. And so we have now multiple copious amount of explanation that we've been able to obtain. So if people need that kind of help, let us know, because there's a specific way to do it, and it's quite particular in terms of how they want that applied for. Now, having said that, there are still exemptions. So if you are coming and you're permitted to come and work as a student in the health field, or if you're permitted to come as a provider of emergency services, in those cases, you do not need to go through those steps. But those are the narrow cases that are exempted from that. So if you're dealing with that kind of situation, let us know. We can try to interpret that for you. On that, there's been some concern about people who want to come in and they want to get their work permits. And what about my spouse or my common law partner and my kids? Can they come with me? And I've sort of triple checked on this, because we know that initially a couple weeks ago, whole families were able to come in on fresh work permits, and now the guidance is that, and this was always the law as of a couple weeks ago with what's called the order in councils that were produced, it had the word reuniting in it. So in other words, the law is that you have to be sending first the person who's going to come on the work permit and work for the employer, And then once that person is separated from their loved ones, then the loved ones can apply for entry to Canada and get special approval for that. So although people were getting away with it, I guess, before, the guidance is quite clear that that's, I think they're more aware of it as well, that you have to be reuniting. So you have to send the worker first and then ask their family to come. There's also a lot of confusion around whether or not there is a test upon a test. So in other words, if you meet the basic work permit criteria, whether you're coming from the States or whether you're coming from abroad, is that all that needs to happen? And of course, you need to show that you have a valid job offer still. And so we are putting together very detailed application packages that are beyond the normal packages we put together for clients when they're seeking work permits, but talking about all these special quarantine act and order in council and different things that have been released, and we're putting together particular guidance on that, and we're reminding officers at the border that there is no test that the person has to be working in the fight against COVID-19 or has to be part of critical infrastructure or has to be part of ensuring that Canada's food supply is maintained. That test upon a test doesn't exist officially. So we shouldn't have to be making those kinds of arguments. And if you are an employer and you just need a regular foreign worker like you've always needed, in any capacity, don't be concerned about whether or not this person, again, is assisting with the food supply or the fight against COVID-19. We can make arguments and we can try to convince the border officers that there is no additional test. So now there are a couple other little things. If it's a paper-based application, people should know that a wet signature is required. They're not being flexible on that right now. If there are, let's see, there's also an update from the Minister's Office on international students. So international students who are set to come in May, now this isn't, the May-June cohort isn't the largest cohort, that will be in September, and we're waiting for guidance on that. But if you're, if you have a student coming in, they can start their workload online and do up to 50% of their coursework from outside of Canada without affecting their ability to get the coveted work permit, which you get upon graduation. Also, finally, I should note that there was an order in council that was just published effective April 15, and that order in council was dealing with the words quarantine and isolation, and those were defined. So if you're asymptomatic and in order to prevent the spread, that's considered a quarantine, and you have to quarantine for 14 days unless the Minister of Health is inviting you or the Chief Public Health Officer says you're essential, or the Ministers of Public Safety, Immigration, or Foreign Affairs invite you, or you're working in a health field to fight COVID-19, or, and this was an interesting one, if you're working in an integrated transborder community, like for instance the nurses in Windsor who are going to Detroit. So all those people are exempt from the need to quarantine for 14 days. If you actually are infected or have symptoms, then that's called isolation. And then you will be required to show that there's a plan there. By the way, if you can't quarantine or the place isn't suitable for quarantine as per the Border Services Officer, in other words, you could infect vulnerable people. If that's your plan to go and work in a nursing home or something, then they're gonna say, look, you may need to take government transportation and you may go to a government facility. So just be aware of that. And of course, we should all be aware going forward that people have to wear non-medical masks or face coverings when they're coming in now at the border. So that's all I have by way of a general update, and I'll turn it over to Shoshana for some of her updates.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. The overriding thing is that we are not recommending anybody travel if they have travel plans right now without touching base with us to make sure that they can fit into the particular category that they are approved and that they have covered all of these additional scenarios that have never existed until the current time. So it's really a situation of being as prepared as possible, but ultimately it is up to the border officer who is dealing with that potential request for entry into Canada at that moment. And hopefully, as time goes on, the border officers become more consistent with their evaluations of each and every application, so there can be some consistency, because we all thrive on consistency and predictability, which is something that hasn't been around for the last couple of weeks and hopefully does get better. But one thing that has been consistent this week is the government's inviting individual applicants to apply for express entry. It's been a busy week for express entry applications, and the government has invited individuals with the lowest score in quite some time. It happened yesterday on April 16th, the lowest score being 455. But the catch to these most recent invitations is the fact that they have been, well, yesterday specifically for Canadian Experience class applicants, so it's benefiting those individuals who are in Canada. The government has said that I don't know if there's going to be able to be some invitations for federal skilled workers coming up in the future. Hopefully they allow for that, but as it stands right now, the draws most recently over the last week or two have been specific to either CEC applications or PNP applications. But the good news is that the score yesterday of 455, well, it's the lowest it's been in 2020, and if you go back into 2019, it hasn't been that low. If you look back since May, almost a year ago, May 1st, 2019, it was 450. In April, it was 451. March, if you go back in February 2019, it was 457. So it's really reflecting the fact that those applicants who are in the pool, and if you look at actually who's in the pool, it's interesting if you look at the numbers, because the government does post the CRS score distribution of candidates in the express entry pool as of April 14th. They update it. And right now there's 42,000 candidates in the pool who have scores between 401 and 450. And then above 451, there's 22,000. And the draw yesterday was around 3,700. And you go back, the biggest one since March, which was 3,900 applicants. So the good news is for those individuals, the CEC applicants, the majority of them, individuals who are working in Canada on intercompany transfers, IECs, post-grad work permits, they're getting the benefit here because the minimum scores are dropping, which is a good thing. But the challenge is to balance that with those highly qualified individuals who are abroad, who meet the criteria. We're not sure when it's going to kick in and the FSWs will be able to receive invitations. So that's, you know, this goes back to our message last week that the government is open for business and that they are processing applications, and they are, they have the ability, you know, it's definitely easier for them to process applications that are submitted online. The paper ones may take longer because that requires the individual officers to deal with them in the physical spaces of the office, when the majority of officers are now, similar to all of us, working from home. So that's a bit of a challenge on the PR front. But we are still preparing and submitting applications, the paper-based applications being the sponsorships. And we're highly recommending, you know, because of the challenges at the border when it comes to the entry of the spouses or partners of Canadian citizens, we are recommending that sponsorship applications be put in to facilitate that process if those individuals want to be reuniting with their Canadian citizen or PR spouses in Canada. It would be beneficial to that foreigner to have that permanent residence application submitted. And then when it comes to the actual requirements on the PR applications, the good news is, I mean, we've been having individuals who doctors are processing when the invitations are issued, medicals are issued, and it is possible to complete those medicals. The designated medical practitioners are open for business and are facilitating. I just had a note, they weren't processing minor kids, some doctors, but it changes day to day. And that goes as well, the changing day to day also goes to the ability to have the requirements to put yourself into the pool, for example, for express entry, the ability to have the language tests completed. Those test dates are available. They may be pushed out. You know, the testing organizations, IELTS and CELPIP, are evaluating, obviously, on a day-to-day if and when they're going to be able to allow people to take the tests. It's interesting. Most recently, they've come up with a solution for students to evaluate their language, and perhaps immigration will be reevaluating their process for acceptable language test results, because there's going to be a big lineup to take those tests. So it's highly recommended that individuals get in line who are interested in permanent residence to get moving with that scenario. So good news for CEC applicants who this year and for the majority of last year may not have had high hopes because of the drop. That's a good news story for immigration. So we're happy about that. So that's a bit of an express entry update. And I think at this point, Stephen, we're going to look at some questions that people had sent in. Maybe I'll start with a few. Okay, and then Ravi and I will sort of go back and forth. Some, you know, the overriding question is immigration still processing? Are there going to be delays? Well, there will likely be delays. Do we know how long? Of course, we don't know. I mean, this is an evolving process. And generally, let's take express entry, for example. I mean, previously, the average processing time was 6 months for 80% of the applications. Given that they are continuing, I mean, they had a bit of a pause in March, but you know, they're still going to be processing these applications, and all of the documentation is submitted online. So I would hope that that processing time should continue. The only potential snag I would see on processing times would be maybe with getting police clearances to finalize applications. That would be something beyond immigration's control that they may have to wait out and see in that regard. So, but the reality is immigration's still open for business and they can put things in. Someone asked when the lockdown will be changed. Obviously, that's something only the scientists know. We can't really talk about that. Someone asked a question, someone who's here on a visitor visa and cannot go back home right now, you're able, if someone's in Canada as a visitor, and due to the travel restrictions in other countries and whatnot, it's definitely a scenario where you could contemplate an extension, and there is a process for that, and we could definitely facilitate that process. I do recommend that. You always want to be maintaining valid status, and for visitors, unless you're stamped otherwise, are automatically given 6 months upon entry. So anybody who's here as a visitor, keep track of those dates and apply for the extension in advance of the expiry date. Someone asked, because of COVID-19, I had to lay off my front staff of my restaurant. Can I still apply for LMIAs to support my kitchen staff? We have been facilitating that. So it may be an issue, the layoffs, but if they're for different positions than the kitchen staff, you probably are okay to proceed, and we could assist with that. You should definitely reach out, because I think it's a bit of a tricky scenario and you have to be able to explain it to ESDC officials in an appropriate manner. Final question I'm going to take before I switch it over to Ravi. Is there going to be an extension of the immigration student program? Student program, I'm just not exactly sure what this person is asking, but you know, the basic gist of the study permits upon graduation, the coveted, as Ravi said, postgraduate work permit, there's been no discussion of changing any of that. It still exists, and that is a huge selling point for the universities and the colleges of our Canadian program, that it allows individuals the ability to work for those specific periods of time on the postgrad work permits. So that's what I'm going to take at this point. Ravi,
okay, well, I can answer some questions that have been sent in. So one was on parents and grandparents program. When is it going to reopen? I mean, there's no word on that. So I would say that's completely on hold right now, and we just have to wait and see. And I wouldn't expect it to reopen until you know, things have stabilized dramatically in Canada. lots more testing, and the numbers of cases going way down, and they can ensure that elderly people coming in will be safe. In terms of chance to reduce the CRS score, well, we are, as Shoshana mentioned, it's being reduced for the Canada Experience class, and I assume people, if you're asking that question, you might be in Canada, so that's good news for you. And it could go down even further. And we were discussing this morning, and Shoshana also pointed out that, you know, there's an Ontario program as well, so it could be that you could be selected through the Ontario program. Will a Canadian be re-entering Canada be required to quarantine? And yes, the answer is yes. According to the order in council that came out, it says any person entering Canada who doesn't have symptoms must quarantine themselves. So that would include a Canadian citizen. Let's see, will intercompany transfer work permit be affected? Just waiting for the lockdown to finish so I can transfer. Okay, so the reality is, this is what I was saying earlier, the regular work permit categories are still operating. So there should be no issue. The official word from this Canada Border Services Agency and from the Immigration Department is that those applications can be processed. So I think we just have to explain the quarantine plan. There's a number of steps we have to take to put your best foot forward, but yes, those are being done. Are Canadians able to fly back to Canada to apply for the US TN permit at the airport and then book a flight back to the US? Well, I think that's a bit confusing. Fly back to Canada to apply for their US TN work permit. I think what they're saying is flying to Canada and then going in to apply for the TN. I think the issue is that, you know, Canada might say you're coming for a non-optional or non-discretionary or discretionary purpose. If you're just flying in so that you can then return to the US, that's flagpoling the other way. So I would be cautious about that. I think that you may have some trouble, although if they just deny you entry and you're back into the US, then maybe you could apply for your NAFTA TN work permit. And I understand that the US side is taking NAFTA work permits right now for Canadian citizens who are going into the United States. Otherwise, I think there were just some questions about in terms of fee increases. Go ahead, Shoshana.
Yeah, I was going to say, people should be aware there will be fee increases at the end of April. That has nothing to do with the virus situation. There's just a natural government. I think the 550 permanent resident on economic classes are going up. What are they going up to, Ravi? 800 and something, I think.
Yeah.
That just is a perk of the current times. So interesting timing. It's just a government order that came about. Nothing to do with anything, something unrelated to the virus.
And there's a question about, I'm here in visitor status, can I apply for an extension? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can. So, and that's fully expected, and you know, it's not a problem at all. Even if you can't support your application with the kinds of things that we normally put into it, of course we'll ask you for certain key documents, and we want to make it as complete as possible, but they will hold that application if there are certain things you can't get that would otherwise have supported your application. So, so definitely, yes, you can apply for an extension, especially given you can't travel. If your country is not accepting you, for instance, back right now, that's a very good answer.
Yeah, I think immigration will be facilitating those, because as long as you can demonstrate that you're able to support yourself during this time, you should be okay. I mean, hopefully by the time.
Last one I have is foreign academics coming with an LMIA by air, and those coming via border. So again, like if you're coming with an LMIA, that's not good enough. You're going to have to make sure you have that approved work permit or a work permit approval letter if you're coming from outside the United States. If you're coming from the U.S., then you will be able to come. And it talks about a July 1st date, but that has nothing to do with anything. You're still able to come if you have a work permit approval from abroad, or if you're from the States. Again, if you have that LMIA, just make sure that you contact us, because we'll want to get evidence that you for sure have that job still available, and then we'll provide other guidance on quarantine and the quarantine plan and all kinds of other stuff. So just reach out to us for that. Shoshana, did you have any other?
Yeah, one person was asking about provincial medical insurance because of the delay of the application. Well, in Ontario, they're extending coverage, so there's constant negotiation between the feds and the provinces about extending that because they realize that individuals' medical insurance are going to be an issue. But for Ontario specific, they are being covered, notwithstanding, let's present the expiry of a work permit. So they should be.
So if you guys have further questions, I mean, you can reach Shoshana and I on our emails, and you can navigate through the website to find it, and we're happy to answer questions. If you have if you're an existing client of the firm and you have a lawyer you're working with, please reach out to that lawyer. But otherwise, just email us directly, and we'll be happy to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we're all working from home, but business is as usual. And if people are interested in any immigration matter, notwithstanding, the virus, things are going on and things will get back to normal, and there will be a big lineup when things do get back to normal. So just keep, let us know if we can help.
Thank you, Shoshana. Thank you, Ravi, very much for sharing your expert advice today and taking the time to do that. I'd like to thank everyone else for attending today's webinar. As Ravi mentioned, you can contact Shoshana or Ravi. Their email addresses are provided on screen now, and I will also send a follow-up email, and you'll be able to contact them directly through the email. So until next time, everybody, stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.